Welcome to Gateway Sermons, and thank you for joining us as we venture together through God's Word.
Gene Botham, brother of Brant Botham, was sitting in his apartment one day. A black man sitting in his own apartment, and an off-duty police officer, Amber Geiger, entered into what she says she thought was her own apartment and shot and killed him about a year ago in September. And many cried, "Justice, justice, justice." She needs to get punished. She needs to pay for what she's done. And about a week ago, when they were deliberating in terms of the sentence, Gene Botham's brother, Brant here, said, "I love you just like I love anyone else. I forgive you, and I don't even want you to pay for the pain that you've caused my family." Bertram, Gene's father, said, "That's what Christ would want us to do. If you won't forgive, neither will your Father forgive you. I don't want to see her rot in hell. I don't even want to see her rot in prison. I hope this will help to change her, that she would recognize the damage, the hurt that our family's going through. So I wish her well, and I pray for her family, and I pray for her as well." Gateway Church, only the gospel can provide the framework where you can look straight in the eyes at a betrayer or a denier or someone who would desperately harm you and inflict personal damage on you. Look them in the eyes and say, "I forgive you, you're free to go." The love that the Botham family had for Christ is empowering them through the worst time in their whole lives. And all across America, people are seeing that video played. And it's a testimony to Jesus, because only the gospel can transform death, betrayal, greed, power-hungry self-righteousness into occasion for life, forgiveness, love, and beauty. Only the gospel can produce this. And it's here. Here we are in John chapter 18, a study we've been doing now for over a year in the Gospel of John, working our way through. And in some ways, I feel like we're climaxing here with the last 2-3 chapters, where we're headed to, it's the moment we've all been waiting for, right? It's the moment where Jesus will be directly betrayed, intimately betrayed by one of his own. And as he's approaching this moment, there's so much anticipation even in my heart. Jesus is walking into a garden in John chapter 18, and he's about to face sudden betrayal, sudden death. Look what it says in John chapter 18, verse 1. When Jesus had spoken these words, he just prayed a prayer. Now he's spoken those words to his Father. He went out with his disciples across the brook Kidron, where there was a garden which he and his disciples entered. Now Judas, who betrayed him, knew this place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. Judas, having procured a band of soldiers and some officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, went there with lanterns and torches and weapons. So Jesus is walking, and where does he enter? But into a garden. He enters into a garden. Thinking about this passage, I don't normally get this way. This isn't normally how my study time goes. But I couldn't even read verse 1 this week without breaking down and weeping. Honestly. And I told my wife, she's like, "That's a little dramatic." I'm like, "I know." Because I'm not normally a guy who it's so easy for tears just to fill my heart and to fill my face. But this time it moved me deeply. And I'm going to try to explain why. See, you guys know what garden this is, right? Like if I say biblical garden, word association game, you know there's only 2 gardens I could be talking about. Eden, or what's the answer? Gethsemane, right? The second garden. This garden where Jesus will be betrayed. So there's like 2 famous gardens in the Bible story. Eden, the first garden where Adam and Eve were created, and Gethsemane, where Jesus Christ was betrayed. What's so interesting to me about the way John is weaving this story now is here we are, and Jesus is walking into a garden. But you know what's funny? Every other gospel names the garden Gethsemane. Every other gospel tells us the name of the garden. John is the only one who leaves it anonymous. And I think this is intentional. Because John is trying to leave an impression in our minds and in our hearts. It's not that garden you think he's talking about. See, yes, it's the historical Garden of Gethsemane, but there's something bigger. He's trying to draw us into the plot of Scripture. He's trying to remind us of the first garden, and here we are in the second garden, and almost the same exact thing is going to happen again. See, every time John uses names or places, he's very, very particular about the words he uses, where he names something, and where he leaves something unnamed. For instance, Nicodemus in chapter 3. Do you guys remember all the way back in chapter 3? His name means the conquering one. And what does Nicodemus come to do? But to conquer and be the champion over Jesus. He's coming to put Jesus in his place. As a teacher, he's coming to debate. His posture is one of darkness. He comes at night. So Nicodemus, the champion, the conquering one, is coming to impose his will on God, on Jesus, right? But it gives us his name because it wants us to know a little bit about what kind of man this guy is. I mean, Nicodemus, he's the champ. He's Israel's best representative in debate against God's best representative, Jesus Christ. So the name is given to us because it's important. But then think about this. What's Jesus' mother's name? What is it, guys? Mary. Everyone knows Mary, but if you read only the Gospel of John, you wouldn't know that. Did you know that? Never once is Jesus' mother named Mary in the Gospel of John. Why? It's intentional because John is using it as a rhetorical device. He's trying to tell us, when you hear, I don't want you to think Mary, I want you to think mother of Jesus, because it's trying to contrast the mission of Jesus to honor his mother over and against the mission of Jesus to honor and obey his heavenly Father. Every time Mary or Jesus' mother comes up, it's always anonymous, because the Gospel of John is using the anonymity of the names as a tool to teach us something. So it is no mistake that when we enter John chapter 18:1, it says, now Jesus walked into a garden. Everyone reading this says, why didn't he tell us the name of the garden? It's a real place and people know about it. I mean, this is the last gospel written out of the four. Certainly everyone knows he's talking about Gethsemane, and it's because John is telling us, no, bigger than that. We're talking bigger garden. We're not just talking about the physical location where Jesus was. We are talking about the garden where God was betrayed in Eden. That's what we're talking about. And here it is again. And so every other gospel names the garden because every other gospel is trying to give us historical specificity. But John is interested in teaching us something theologically, that God is in a garden again, facing humanity again, and he will be betrayed again. And the thought of how detailed this story was, it just wrapped me up into the Bible story again. And reading it, I became emotional because I realized here is God who already was betrayed in a garden. And Satan was there. And he was the Son of God. God was betrayed in a garden by the behest of Satan's activity. And here he is in another garden. And he's walking right into that garden knowing it's going to come again. I mean, how many of us would move towards pain like that? How many of us would move towards a garden like that, knowing what was in front of us? But here's Jesus, knowing what's coming, headed right into the garden to be betrayed, just like the start. John has been telling us to see the book of the Gospel of John through Genesis lens since chapter 1. Remember, it starts off, in the beginning was the Word. In the beginning are the first words of the book of Genesis. So John is telling us what's taking place in the ministry of Jesus is a new Genesis, a new world, a new creation, a world where all things will be made new and beautiful again by the powerful work of Jesus Christ. And here's John walking into this garden, the second Adam. Here's Jesus walking into this garden, the second Adam to be betrayed by the first Adam. Yeah, he has a different name. His name is Judas this time, but it's the same face. It's the same man. Because every man since Adam has been cursed with an innate desire to betray Jesus, to turn him over for our own selfish pleasure. But here is God beginning a second Genesis in the biblical garden, the second Adam, Jesus Christ, battling against Satan. And in the first garden, death came from life. But in this garden, hear me, in this garden, life will come from death. This is the ultimate reversal, guys. John is so intentional about every single word he's packing into these next two chapters. He doesn't want us to miss a thing. And the betrayal is especially painful because of how intimate it is. This isn't some anonymous, cyber stealing your bank account, stealing your identity kind of betrayal. That's too removed. This is in your face. I've eaten at your table. I've slept in your house. I know your middle name. This is like blood kind of betrayal. How do you know that? Because verse 2 tells us Judas knew where Jesus would be because he used to go there with him. Could you hear, could you feel the intimacy of this betrayal? The power of this betrayal. This is I know your secrets kind of betrayal. It reminded me of the story of The Matrix. You guys ever seen The Matrix? In The Matrix, there's a character named Neo who he's unplugged. This whole world is plugged into these machines, and the whole world's kind of been taken over in this kind of Armageddon, post-apocalyptic world. They're all plugged into these machines. And this guy named Neo, which means new, he's like this Christ figure, he figures out that the world that he's in is fake. And he's this prophetic one who's been promised to save the world, right? And so what he does is he unplugs and goes into the real world, and it's all chaotic and jacked up. But what happens is if you die or you get unplugged in the real world, right, you die in the fake world. You die. And so there's this guy who's unplugged who knows the true reality of the world. His name is Cypher, and he knows what's going on. He knows the enemy is the robots who've taken over. And yet he makes a deal with the enemy saying, if you put me back into the machine, back into the false reality, and treat me like a king, I don't care. I'll betray everyone. I'll kill them all. His name is Cypher. And the reason why that came to my mind is because he's tasted reality. He knows what's really going on. Could you imagine knowing that the world you live in is fake, being removed for that, and then saying, put me back in and erase my mind. I'll live a fake life. I don't care. Just make me comfortable. This is Judas's kind of betrayal. He's tasted and seen that the Lord is good firsthand. He saw water turned into wine. He saw the dead raised. He saw the sick healed. He saw the blind see. He saw and heard the best sermons anyone will ever hear. He's tasted reality, and he's looking Jesus in the face now with a band of soldiers saying, put me back into the fake world. I don't care. Give me a couple of dollars, and I'll turn my back on this guy. And when they come, it's like so clearly painted as this intimate betrayal between friends. Not anonymity, but between people who know each other very well. And then verse 3 says, Judas knows this place because he's been there. Judas is the one who grabbed these soldiers. Remember, Judas is kind of leading the charge. He keeps on being mentioned. Who does he get? He gets a band of soldiers and some officers from the chief priests and Pharisees. They go there with lanterns, torches, and with weapons. So it's like a mob. Like this mob is showing up, but Judas is right at the front. So like imagine like this, Judas is the point man who's leading the charge against the rebellion of God. He's leading the betrayal of Jesus. And what I want you to catch is a couple things. Number one, the whole world is present in this garden betrayal. You say, what do you mean, Pastor Joe? Well, it tells us, it says that there's soldiers who are representing Rome. It tells us that there are the Jewish chief priests representatives who are kind of like this temple police. So there's the religious powers, the Jews, right? And then Judas is there. And what is Judas representing? But Satan, because chapter 13:1 says that Satan was already tempting Judas. And then chapter 13 later on says Satan entered Judas. So here's what we have present in the garden. The world powers of Rome, the religious powers of the Jews, and the demonic power of Satan. All opposing, standing together, lockstep against God in this garden. Now, the amount of soldiers that they get is absurd. It says here that the word in Greek, it means a detachment. It could be up to 1,000. 1,000 people. Likely, there's probably less. There's probably somewhere between 200 to 600. But still, you're going to get one man who's only shown himself to be gracious, kind, loving, and good, and there's 200 of them here with weapons. I mean, this is a mob. This is like Beauty and the Beast. Kill the beast, right? Like that, all right? This is like a mob after Jesus. They have all the weapons, and they're standing against him, and everyone who is represented there is representing the whole world. They bring lights in case he runs. Isn't it ironic? They bring these little lanterns to extinguish the light of the world. But there he is in this garden, standing against the powers of this world, the Rome, the Jews, and Satan, and he's standing against them, and as he's standing against them, he will face them down head on. Verse 4. Jesus, knowing all that would happen to him, he comes forward and he says to them, whom do you seek? The Greek word there is knowing what's been placed upon him. This is specific wording. It's not just that he knows what's going to happen. He knows this is his moment to take the wrath of God, to take the judgment of man. This is his moment, that the hour that he's been talking about, praying about, preparing his whole ministry for. It's all climaxing here. This is his moment. And Jesus steps into his moment. He initiates the conversation. And with courage, bravery, self-control, and strength, he asks a pointed question: whom do you seek? Man, what courage to stand against this army of people who he knows they're out for him, because he knows what's about to be placed on him, and he's the one initiating conversation. Whom do you seek? I'll tell you, man, growing up, I don't feel like I was ever scared of anything. All right, and as I've gotten older, I feel like I've gotten a little softer. Sometimes I go back to my old hood, and I'm like, this is scary. You know what I'm saying? I've been in the valley a little too long, I guess. I don't know. But like, back then, it was the regular didn't feel that way. But as I'm getting older, I'm getting a little more scared of things. And I think part of it's because I have a child now and a wife, and so now it's not just me, right? But it's them, and I'm thinking about them. I would always make fun of my wife for the dreams she had, or she gets scared for everything. I love my wife, but like that's one of the things that she just always gets scared. I remember one time we had a hole in our roof because an electrician had to climb up there, so they made this hole. So she comes and we're like going back and forth joking. She's like, imagine there's someone up there, there's a homeless guy sleeping up there. As soon as she said that, she goes, oh no. And I was like, you just said it, like, She's like, shh, don't say that. I'm like, you said it, not me, right? So like that's how quick my wife is to get scared. And I used to make fun of her for that, the dreams she had, the kind of things she was scared of. But honestly, I see myself going down that road. Like I'm scared of things like that now sometimes, right? Like for instance, when we were pregnant with Olive, mostly Emily. Emily was the major one pregnant. We're gonna have this baby, and we were both getting freaked out because. Well, here's what happened, is I was fine until they said it's a girl. I was like, oh my gosh, what do you mean? Check again. All right, you're wrong, doctor. Because I worked with teen girls, so little baby girls become teen girls, and that's scary, right? Amen? So, terrified. I just had my head, I was terrified. And so I started to have these nightmares, like legitimate nightmares, irrational, but like they felt so real and they were so gripping, and I was terrified. Probably the funniest nightmare I had of all was the day where I had this nightmare that they were going to take my baby from me. Like literally, the doctor the baby came out, and the doctor looked at the baby and said, whispered with some people, and they took the baby out. When they brought the baby back in, they were talking, and what had happened was they said, we hate to inform you about this, but we need the child protective services here to take your baby. And I said, wait a minute, what? My wife's like crying. I'm like crying. What do you mean? That's our baby. And they said, your baby has the case of cavities. And I'm like, no, cavities? How is that possible? And they looked at me and they said, you don't brush your teeth. And I'm like, oh God, no, they caught me, right? And I'm like freaking out because I don't brush my teeth somehow. That means I'm not going to have a baby. My baby has cavities. And I remember it's funny now, but in the time it was terrifying because they're like taking my baby away. And I remember so clearly my mother-in-law looking at me in the dream and scowling and shaking her head like, how could you do this? And I'm like, I'm sorry. And then the doctor, he's looking at me thinking, how could you do this? And my baby, and my wife is crying like, Joey, how could you do this? And I remember so clearly looking at my baby, and my baby's like, with their crooked teeth. And I was like, oh. Irrational fear. Irrational fear as I'm getting older. Completely irrational fear. Makes no sense. Why do I fear those things? I don't know. Maybe you're like me. As you're getting older, you're getting more scared of things. Things come up against you, and they scare you. You're like, I'm not even sure. It doesn't make any sense. Why? I know mentally that makes no sense, but it still scares me. That's why I love that Jesus is this brave. Because in the moment where it totally makes sense for him to be scared, it totally makes sense for him to cower and run, it totally is just, if Jesus takes off running, we're like, yeah, of course. That's the natural human response. That's not cowardly. That's what any of us would do. Jesus says, steps forward, knowing what's going to take place, and says, whom do you seek? Courage, strength, bravery. They answer him, verse 5, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus says to them, I am he. Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with him. Every word intentional. Where is Judas standing? Is he standing with Jesus? No, he's standing with them. Let me ask you a question right now. Where are you standing? Are you standing with them? Are you standing with Jesus? Oh, sure, we'd all like to say, yeah, we're standing with Jesus, but maybe, and if you don't understand this and you don't really understand the gospel, at some point in our life, we were all standing with them, right? We were all standing with them. If you think you were born standing with Jesus, you don't get the gospel, because the gospel begins not with your incredible ability to perform morally, but rather that you, like Jesus, are standing, like Judas, are standing with them. He's standing with them. Who are you seeking? Jesus of Nazareth. I am he. Jesus gives his name and his origin. They ask for his name and his origin, and Jesus gives both with the same answer. They say, who are you seeking? They say, Jesus of Nazareth. Now, you can tell a lot about a person by his name and where he's from, right? So Jesus answered by saying, I am he. If I told you I'm Joe from Beverly Hills, you got some expectations, like, oh, okay. If I tell you I'm Joe from Compton, you're like, oh, okay, right? That's a different, you see what I'm saying? Name and origin tell a lot about a person. So they're saying, who are you looking? Jesus of Nazareth. Now, Jesus answers their question about who he is by giving a divine name with a divine origin. He says, I am. That's it. That's all it says in Greek. He's been using this all throughout the Gospel of John. I am. It's the first name of God. And people know that he's telling us not only what his name is, but where he's from. I'm from God. I am the self-existent one throughout all of eternity. I am. They get it. They hear it loud and clear what Jesus is saying. He's saying that he is aligning himself with God. Look at verse 6. When Jesus said to them, I am he, they drew back and they fell to the ground. So he asked them again, whom do you seek? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus said, I told you I am he. It's crazy. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. He says, I am he. When he says that, they fall to the ground. They fall back and they fall to the ground. Now, again, we're thinking of the story, 200 men lined up against one guy. He says his first name, and they're on their face. See, it's almost like in that moment, glory broke open for a second, and the name and the powerful name of Jesus overcomes these people so that Philippians 2 is honored, where it says, every knee will bow and every tongue confess that he is Lord. They're betraying their own confession. They know they're about to crucify this guy, but they know he's a king with power because he says his first name, and they fall prostrate on their face. Listen, here are the options, friends. You can bow or you can be bowed. But when he says his first name, those are the options. One commentator said it so perfectly, I couldn't say it better. He said, they are hopelessly outnumbered by one. It's 1 against 1,000, and I'm putting my money on the one. You know what I'm saying? He's like, all right, let's go. Who's gonna, like he's got himself. He's not terrified, but he's not gonna win by fighting, but rather by sacrificing. But they are hopelessly outnumbered in this occasion, just at the voice of his name, the sound of his name. This is what this tells us. Man, listen up, Gateway. Why do we look at our circumstances and think that somehow points to a deficiency in the power and sovereignty of God? Why? Here is Jesus in a hopeless situation. Everyone would look at that situation and say, yeah, he's going to lose. He's going down. He has no power. He's not the one in charge of this situation. Yet he's the one speaking. He's the one initiating. He's the one talking. He's the one stepping forward. He is in charge. In some ways, we could say this has less to do with what the world is doing to Jesus and so much more to do with what Jesus is doing for the world. He's in charge. Even in his death, he's in control. He's sovereign. Here's what I'm saying, Gateway. Some of you stepped into this church this morning with a terrible situation. You're looking at your circumstances saying, are you in control? Because I feel outnumbered here. I feel surrounded. I feel backed into a corner. I feel like it doesn't make sense financially. The numbers don't add up. My marriage is faltering and failing and dead. How can you say that you're in charge? My kids have wandered away from the faith. My family life is torn to shreds. You come in here saying, my faith is as good as dead. It's tattered. I'm not sure if I believe anymore. I don't even know where I'm at this morning. And as you stand against this crowd, this mob, this circumstance that seems unbearably painful to even look at, remember the one who stood against them before you and said, I am he, and he was in charge. Jesus is sovereign in this moment. And look what he says in the end of verse 6. Verse 8, I told you I am he. he has to repeat himself. Whom do you seek? Jesus of Nazareth. I am he. Boom, they fall. Hey, guys, get up. This is getting embarrassing. Whom do you seek? Like, let's get on with it, right? Get up. I know, I'm glorious. Whom do you seek? And they're like, Jesus of Nazareth. I told you, I am he. Jesus is the one moving this conflict along. And man, so like, one of the things here at Gateway that you'll know is we're what's called a Christ-centered church, a gospel-centered church. Part of what that means is every time we preach on Sunday morning, you will hear the gospel. Not just Jesus died for your sin, but you're going to hear how the gospel applies to every part of your life. So at least at one point in the sermon, I'm going to talk about Jesus. I promise you that. That's going to happen every Sunday, all right? But there's sermons like this where like I have 5 points and they all are the gospel. You know what I'm saying? And so here, like here's like a boop, here's a gospel moment where you're going to hear it again. Because it's so clear. A lot of times people read the Gospels and say, man, there's no hint of substitutionary sacrifice, that Jesus goes down for his people, that's something that Paul came up with later. No, it is right in the Gospel, and you can see it right there in verse 8. Look at John chapter 18, verse 8. It's so powerful. Jesus said to them, I told you I am he, so if you seek me, let these men go. Did you hear it? Did you hear the Gospel? I'm going to read it again so you can hear it, because I want you to have eyes to see that when you're reading the Word, I want you to say, there it is. There's the gospel. So hear it. Jesus answered and said, I told you, I am he. If you seek me, let these men go. The gospel is this. I go down, my friends go free. Got it? I go down, my friends go free. That's what a hero is. It's someone willing to substitute themselves in your place, in your dangerous place, and go down so that you can go free. Right? Right? Like that's fundamentally what the gospel is. Remember the Aurora shooting? In the Aurora shooting, people were just totally blindsided. And yet, there was three men who threw themselves on their girlfriend, their wife, their significant other. And what they did is they protected them. And everyone, a lot of them, they were 24, 26, and I think, all in their young mid-20s, giving themselves for the life of someone else. And everyone raised them up and said, that's the definition of a hero. I go down, my loved ones go free. And we look at that, we say, yeah, that's what it means to be a hero. We look at the soldiers and say, yeah, they fight on our behalf, they go down so we can live free. We look at the firemen and say, yeah, they run into the burning building, everyone's running away from the burning building. We look at all these people and we think that's probably the definition of a hero. I go down, someone else goes free. I die so they can live. See that? Jesus says, if you seek me, then these guys get to go. That's the gospel, church. That's the gospel. The gospel is you deserve to die, and yet Jesus goes down so you can go free. You deserve punishment and condemnation. Jesus goes down so you can go free. This morning, here's what I'm saying. If you came in here with shame, with guilt, with the fact that maybe you came in here because someone dragged you, right? They kind of did like the bait and switch. Hey, let's go get breakfast. Wait, what? Why are we turning the gateway? Sorry, here you are. Welcome. All right. We don't advocate line, but you know what I'm saying? All right. You're here. So listen. You maybe didn't plan to be here, but I want to give you something that could change eternity for you. Jesus says to you this morning, if you are a sinner, I'll go down and you can go free. I will die and you can live. And if you receive that gift, you will forever be with him. That's the good news. It's like, you guys remember Batman? There's this character in The Dark Knight Rises in the second movie. His name's Harvey Dent. And Harvey Dent's this politician, and he looks like a good guy on the outside. But as the movie goes on, what we find out about Harvey Dent is he lacks integrity because he's willing to make compromises subtly behind the scenes to get his own agenda pushed forward, right? And what happens is Harvey Dent eventually, he burns off half of his face, and he becomes the character in Batman known as Two-Faced. And Harvey Dent is this picture of some of us who we look good on the outside, but deep down we're two-faced. I think we're all Harvey Dent. We all have two sides of us, right? One side that looks really good, one side of, whoa, you know what I'm saying? I'm not talking about physically, so I'm like, hey, you know what I'm saying? I'm not talking about Instagram, all right? I'm talking about spiritually, all right? So you're like, I always get my good side. All right, listen, filters are great. What I'm talking about is spiritually. We all have that side that we present to others. It looks good, but when you turn the face, it's another face. That's called two-faced. That's called hypocrisy. That's who Two-Face embodies as a villain. And we can identify with that. But yet, what happens in that moment is this villain who to the public, he looked like a good guy. And so in order for Harvey Dent to save face, what happens in the movie Batman is made a villain. Remember you either die a hero or you live long enough to become a villain, right? Some of you got like, amen, preach it. All right, listen. That's the whole theme of Batman, the second movie. But here's the idea. We need someone to become the villain so that the true villain can become a hero. We need someone to go down and take the rap, become a criminal, so that the true criminal can become a hero. That's the gospel. Jesus becomes sin. Jesus becomes the villain. Jesus becomes the criminal for two-faced people like you and I, for people who are inconsistent. I'm not talking about God's rules. I'm not up here preaching at a bunch of rules that maybe you've never heard before. I'm saying you don't even follow the rules you make up. You tell your kid, don't do that. Don't be mean. And then you're like, hey, you, right? Like, it's like, what are you doing? You just slapped you assaulted your other child in the middle of, right? Like we say one thing. It's like we have two faces. And Jesus died for criminals like that. So that we don't have to pay for it. He becomes a criminal, right? This is the point. Look at verse 12. Every word here matters in this story. Verse 12 says, so the band of soldiers, they go, their captain and the officers of the Jews, and they arrest Jesus and they bind him. They bind Jesus. You know that word binding? It's the same word they would use when they bound a sacrifice to be offered to God. Intentionality. Every word matters. Remember in Abraham is told, I want you to go and sacrifice your son. Do you guys remember that story? So God tells a man named Abraham, I want you to go and sacrifice your son. And Abraham and his wife had not been able to have children. He's literally 100. In fact, they are laughing at God when he makes the promise. And at 90 years old, all right, grandma gets pregnant. All right, it's a little awkward. I'm not going to lie. It's going to be a weird high school, commencement, right? Oh, I'm tired. When they say his name, right? He's old, right? But yet they have a baby through miraculously. God opens the womb of this woman. She has a child, and that's their chosen prized child that God promised them. And then God says, give that child back to me. It's difficult. But Abraham is about to do it. As he's about to kill his son, that's an awkward walk, by the way. Dad, where's the sacrifice? Shut up. Keep walking. Obey me. But they're walking to his death, and the dad turns and grabs Isaac and binds him because he's about to be sacrificed. Now, Isaac gets to go free. In this story, too, there's the gospel again. He gets to go free because a ram in the thicket, God provides a ram, a sacrifice in place of Isaac, because Isaac was a sinner. He couldn't die for anybody. But Jesus is the true Isaac who is bound and doesn't get to go free. Jesus is the true Isaac who doesn't just come up against death, but is actually sacrificed as the Father willed for him to be sacrificed. Jesus is the true Isaac, bound and who dies. That's the imagery you're getting. He's bound, but he's not just put in handcuffs. He's bound the way a sacrifice is bound. And here is our King. Here is the Son of God. Here is the one who made the garden they're standing in, being betrayed by all the world, and even one of his closest friends, Judas. And he's bound like a sacrifice to go and die and pay. Look what happens in verse 10. Look what happens in verse 10. Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it out, struck the high priest's servant, and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus said to Peter, put your sword into your sheath. Shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given to me? Okay, Peter. Peter is awesome, right? There's like 200 people. He's like, no, defend yourself. He's just like, Peter, no. Remember we talked about me dying on the cross? Literally, that's where I'm headed, right? Like, Peter is just like, swing first, apologize later. He's just not thinking about what's taking place. But I actually think, I don't think Peter was trying to kill this guy. Honestly, I don't. I don't think he's just a bad aim. That's kind of how we tend to paint Peter. Like, oh, he was trying to kill him and he got it. No, I think this is very intentional. It's actually a political maneuvering. In order to understand that, we've got to go back a little bit. What is the job of a priest? A priest stands in between God and man. So like if God's over there and humanity's over here, a priest stands in between and reconciles and brings them into relationship. See what I'm saying? So the priest, it's important that he's pure, that he's holy, that he's untainted, that he's a pure sacrifice, right? That, and so to speak, that he is a good, holy person. That's the job of a priest, okay? And so they stand in between a guilty party and an innocent party and bring them into relationship. Well, it's kind of like this. Have you ever, when you were a little kid, have you ever you wanted your friend to come over and you thought, if I ask them to come over, I've been bad all day, so they're going to say no. So you turn to your friend and say, hey, ask my mom if you can come over. Right? Anyone ever done that? Okay, you just asked your priest to intercede on your behalf. You know what I'm saying? You just told someone who's innocent to go and do the work that you can't do. Because if you go to your mom and say, hey, mom, can I? She'll be like, man, no. You know what I'm saying? Ask me again. And that's a challenge, not an invitation, right? So like in that moment, you know that you can't come in your own name, so you ask someone else to come in their name on your behalf. You see what I'm saying? That's a priest. They stand in between two parties, and one intercedes for the other. Or let me give you this example. My parents, they would get so mad at me because we go on long road trips, and I always had to use the restroom like 10 minutes in. All right? Isn't that like the most annoying thing as a parent? That was me. My parents would say, go to the restroom. I'd say, I don't have to go. And I did it. But then 10 minutes later, I did. I mean, sorry, right? Out of control. I don't got it. I'm a little kid, okay? But they would always tell me, try. And I never wanted to because it was annoying to me. But 10 minutes in, I inevitably had to go. So here's what I started to do. My little brother was young enough where he could talk, but he wasn't necessarily potty trained. Hallelujah. So whenever I had to go, and I didn't go before, I'd lean over my little brother and say, tell Mom you got to go to the restroom. All right? So he'd go, Mom, restroom. And she'd say, okay, he's a baby, he's innocent. And so they'd pull over, and I'd always say, well, I'll take him. Gosh, I mean, what kind of brother would I be? Right? God, I got this, Mom. Don't worry, I got it. Right? So I put like my baby like in a stall or something, and go whatever, right? But the point is, he was innocent, I was guilty, but I was asking the innocent one to stand in between. But then one day, my little brother messed up his lines. He turned and said, Mom, Joe has to go to the restroom. I'm like, no, that's not the line. And my mom got so mad because she realized every time it was really me asking, not him. Here's the point. There's a point, I promise. The point is this. I was asking someone innocent to stand in between me and my mom because I was guilty for not doing what they said. Get what I'm saying? That's the role of a priest. So the person who's standing in between the two parties, the guilty and the pure, that person has to be pure as well because they're not going to be united otherwise. See what I'm saying? So it's very important that the person standing in between the two parties is pure. And so the Jews took that literal. They took that literal. The priest, the high priest, had to be pure, not only spiritually pure, but even physically pure. And there's a story during this time period. It's not written in the Bible, but it's a story everyone knew about this during this time period of a high priest who was disqualified from his office because his ear was cut off. His ear was maimed. So people looked at him and said, there's no way God's going to accept what you're doing because you're maimed. You're not a pure person to stand in between these two parties anymore. You can't do your job anymore. You're not undefiled. You're defiled because of your physical limitations. So it wasn't only spiritual for them. For them, it was really physical. So when Peter turns and chops off this guy's ear, what he's trying to do is make a political statement. He's trying to say, fine, I'm going to shame your priest. Trying to come at me? You're trying to come at my king? I'm going to shame your priest, so now you can't do your job anymore. Now, it wasn't the priest. It was the servant of the priest. But here's what I told you at the start. Names matter. Remember I told you names matter? What's his name? Malchus. Those three letters in the Hebrew root of that name means the king. So let's get this straight. The king, the servant, the high priest one is maimed. And it's an act of defiance, saying, we will not submit. I'm going to shame you so you can't do your job anymore, so that your boss will get fired. And what does Jesus respond to them? What does Jesus respond to them? Look what he responds. It's so powerful. Verse 11, put your sword away. I need to drink the cup the Father's given to me. Did you hear it? He just said, don't you get it? I need to be shamed. I am the servant of God. I am the high priest. I am the king. And I need to go down so that you can go free. This is the cup the Father's prepared for me. What you just did to him is what needs to happen to me. I need to take the shame so that you don't have to bear the shame. Peter, you're trying to protect my image, and I'm telling you, let me go down so I can protect you. I need to take his sin, his guilt, his shame. I need to take it away. I need to be shamed, not him. He's not the one who should be shamed. He's not the one who needs to be maimed. He's not the one who needs to be defiled. It is me, because he who knew no sin becomes sin, so that we in him might become the righteousness of God. Very intentional. And all throughout the rest of this, the rest of this chapter, John is going to get you to start asking the question, wait a minute, who's the real high priest? Who's the high priest here? Who is it? I mean, just again and again it's going to come up. It starts with the interrogation. Look at the interrogation process in verse 13. They led him to Annas, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. So if you're reading verse 13, you say, okay, Caiaphas is the high priest. Got it. He's the one who's supposed to stand between God and him. He's the high priest, right? He's the high priest. Then look at verse 19. It says the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. So if you're tracking with the story, you know that they lead him to Annas, right? But then Caiaphas is the one who's in turn interrogating Jesus. So Caiaphas, the high priest, all right, he's the one who's talking right now to Jesus, interrogating him. But here's where it gets really confusing. Look at verse 24. Annas then sends him to Caiaphas, the high priest. Wait a minute. I thought you said he was already talking to Caiaphas. So why is he? Who's Annas? Why is he even involved? Let me back it up a little bit and then explain. Back in the day, if you were a high priest, it was like a family job. So everyone in the family kind of was a part of this process. It was kind of like the Godfather. You know, if you're a Godfather, you just birth people into your mob, right? And so we could almost say that Annas was like the godfather of all the other priests. He had 5 sons. Every one of them was a high priest as well. And his son-in-law, who married into the family, Caiaphas, he gets him into the family business as well. Now, he's the high priest that year, but really the high and respected one, the godfather of them all, the one who's older and done it for many, many years, who served this lifetime, he's been in the office for his whole life. Annas, he's the high priest, right? Kind of like the godfather of the high priest. But Caiaphas is the high priest that year. And so what's happening is, it says they lead Jesus to the high priest. So in your mind, you think, oh, they're leading him to Caiaphas, right? But then verse 24 says, and then Annas leads him to Caiaphas. So wait, did they lead him to Caiaphas or did they lead him to, I don't understand. And what John is doing, some people read this and they go, oh, the Bible's contradicting itself. No, it's so intentional. What John is trying to get you to ask is the question in your mind, who is the real high priest? Will the real high priest stand up, please? Because we need him. Who's the true high priest? And the attentive reader says, it's the one who's being accused. It's the one who's being interrogated. Isn't that ironic? In fact, Jesus is going to talk to a king, and he's the king. Here he is talking to a high priest, 2 of them, we don't know which one's the real one, and we know that the real one's sitting there being interrogated. It's so bizarre. The whole question, it just doesn't make any sense. The high priest, who is it? And the interrogation doesn't make sense. Look at verse 20. Jesus answered him and said, I spoke openly to the world. I've always taught in synagogues and the temple where all the Jews would come together. I said nothing in secret. Why do you keep on asking me? Ask those who heard me what I said to them. They know what I said. When he had said these things, one of the officers standing by struck Jesus with his hand, saying, is that how you answer the high priest? Jesus answered him, if what I said is wrong, bear witness about the wrong. But what I said is right, why do you hit me? So number 1, here's an interrogation. But we have Jesus talking the most, Jesus questioning the most. The one question that we have from the other side, the high priest side, is an ironic question. It's a guy smacking Jesus in the face saying, why are you talking to the high priest there? And the reader says, why are you hitting the high priest there? It's intentionally trying to drive us to ask the question, who's the one standing in between God and man? Every one of us has something or someone standing in between God and man. For a lot of us, it's our good works. I do these good things, and that's what gets me close to God. But for Christians, it's Jesus. He's done these good things, and he's bringing us close to God. So it's an irony that they're saying, why are you treating the high priest that way? When we're looking at Jesus saying, why did you just hit the true high priest? And so part of the problem here is it's hard for us to conceive of a judge who gets off his throne and condescends for the sake of others. Like, for instance, you know the trial we talked about at the start with Botham Jean? Everyone was outraged because after the sentence came down, the judge got off of her where she was seated, and she came down, laid down her gavel, grabbed her Bible, her personal Bible, handed it to this criminal and said, you have 10 years, and you start with John 3:16 and read this book, and it will give you good news of forgiveness, and you can be set free. And the judge hugged this woman who had just brutally murdered this guy in cold blood, right? And the nation outraged and said, that's not right. The judge is supposed to be impartial. The judge is supposed to be not care, not compassionate. They're supposed to be blind and just give justice. See, because in our world, we cannot conceive of a judge who is also merciful. Those categories don't go together. You're either a judge or you have compassion, but they don't work together. But here is Jesus, the judge of the world, the creator of the universe, the God who is holy, and he is also merciful and compassionate to the point of allowing himself to be struck in the face with some guys who have no idea what they're doing. It makes no sense. One thing we know about Caiaphas, though, is he spoke this prophetic word once during his time of being high priest that was deeper than what he even intended. Look at verse 14. Caiaphas is the one who said it would be better for one die than for the people than the nation should die. So earlier on in the gospel, we have this story where Caiaphas says, hey, we need to kill Jesus, because if we don't, Rome's going to come in, they're going to kill all of us, so let's kill Jesus, stop this revolution so we can all live. The anti-gospel. They die so I can live, right? But what he didn't realize is he spoke those words prophetically. He spoke the gospel without even realizing it. He spoke the gospel without even realizing it. What he was saying was, for his own political agenda, let's kill him so we can exist in power and stay where we're at. But what he was truly saying was, let's kill him so that we can all live. The one dying for the many. There's the gospel again. The gospel is one dies for the many. One goes down so that your friends can go freed. So here's this priest who's also a prophet who doesn't even understand his own acts, his own agenda. Here's the saying, the one man must die for the many, and that's exactly what's going to happen, but in ways he can't even understand. And what he's saying is what we've been saying all along, is as Jesus walks into this garden, he says, I go down, my friends go free. No story exemplifies this more in my whole life than the story my dad told of his best friend, Danny. Danny was his deacon at his church, and my dad was a pastor, and they were told to go to this man's house, this woman's house who was being abused by her husband, and they were there to protect her in case things went sideways and her husband got home. They were going to take her and put her into a woman's home. And as my dad went there with his buddy, her husband got home, who was very abusive, very violent, very angry. And when he saw my dad and his deacon standing by him, he pushed through them, went inside the house, and began screaming and throwing things. My dad and my friend were trying to break in the house. They couldn't get in. Finally, he opened the door, but when he did, he had a shotgun pointed straight at my dad's chest. And as he did, he cocked the shotgun, and he said, I'm going to ask you one question, preacher. Do you believe in Jesus? And in that moment, my dad, there was a lot of pressure on this one question, right? Pushed it up against his chest. Do you believe in Jesus? My dad's friend, his name was Danny Mitchell, his best loyal friend, without even hesitating, grabbed the barrel of the shotgun, put it on his own chest, and said, why don't you ask me that question? Not my friend, ask me. My dad always says, I stepped behind him and said, that's right, ask him. Don't come at me like that. This guy knows. The guy was so moved, like, who does that? Who says I go down so my friend goes free? He didn't understand that kind of sacrifice. He didn't understand that kind of substitution. He didn't understand someone who would have the guts, the bravery, the courage to say, let me go down so my friend can go free. And he said, man, you Christians are crazy. He pushed through the two, jumped in his car, and drove off. What did my dad's best friend do? He said, I go down, but my friend goes free. What did Jesus Christ do for you, Gateway? He said, I go down so you go free. If you really understand that, do you understand what kind of community we would be? How could we ever be so selfish? Like, how could we think that person doesn't look like me, so I'm not going to be nice to them? When Jesus said, you're my enemy. See, the idea isn't just I go down so my friend goes free. It's actually much deeper than that. It's I go down so that my enemy goes free. Like, we're not even worthy to be called his friend. You see what I'm saying? Like Romans says, you might die for a good person. You might die for your best friend, but would you die for your worst enemy? Jesus says, that's what I do. And Jesus stops the cycle of violence. He stops the cycle of hate meeting hate and says, let me meet hate with love. Let me meet death with life. I will die so my enemies go free. That's the gospel. The gospel is none of us deserve to have right standing with God. But Jesus says, I go down so you go free. And the freedom you have isn't to live for yourself now. No. It's to now turn around and tell everyone and anyone you can, my Savior went down so I can go free. So how can I go down so you can live? How can I say no to myself so that I can say yes to you? How can I serve? Imagine if we really took that loving gospel into the center of our community. Imagine what we would look like in Brawley. Imagine how much we would change this community. Imagine who we would invite to our table. How every part of our budget and every part of our life would all be centered on a substitute sacrifice and our willingness to say, if he paid the price, I'll pay the price. I want to be like Jesus. The world would stand back and say, you Christians don't make any sense. But that love compels me to be a part of what's going on there. Gateway, I believe if we took this to the center of our community, it would radically change us, and we'd be unlike any community ever. That's the gospel, and that's what's at stake.
Thanks again for joining us. And if you have any questions about today's recording, Gateway Church, or what it means to follow Jesus Christ, you can reach us through the contact section of our website, gwbrawley.org.